Welcome to our friends on Facebook Live and YouTube, and of course our regular followers on Zoom as well. We're going to get going today with a continuation of our discussion of getting better at being you. And today we're going to talk about a character trait which is spoken about extensively in Jewish thought, and we've kind of touched upon it on previous classes, but today we're going to work directly about it, and it's the character trait that is considered one of the worst character traits that a person can have. It's called ego, ga'ava in Hebrew. What exactly is this trait? Why is it so bad? And today I'm going to try to outline 7 signs that you may have a big ego, and of course, most importantly, what you can do about it. So let's begin at the beginning. Right now, we're at a very special time in the Jewish calendar, a time when traditionally the Jewish people have worked on their character traits, and that is the time between Pesach and Shavuot. 49-day period, which leads us from the time of freedom, from the time of Pesach, right to Kabbalat Torah, Shavuot, a time when we receive the Torah. And the rabbis made a big point at telling us the most important thing we could do at this time is work on our character traits in order to be able to receive the Torah on Shavuot in the best and purest way. The Rambam Maimonides goes out of his way to pull out 2 negative character traits. And the Rambam says these 2 traits are the masters of all the bad traits that exist or can exist within a person. Not only are these 2 bad, but if you don't uproot these 2 traits, every other part of your psychological makeup, of your spiritual avodah, is going to be in trouble. And those 2 traits, which are also connected one with the other, as we're going to see, is anger, Ka'as, and ego, ga'ava. What is it about these 2 traits and how are they connected? Well, ego, we're going to see, is a very destructive trait. And I want to make a distinction, before we delve into ego actually, between having a big ego, which the Rambam says is the worst of all traits, and having good, healthy self-esteem, which is an extremely important character trait that we all need to work on. And what's the difference? And we're going to see that having good self-esteem is realizing that I'm good, I'm great, I have amazing abilities, I have so much to contribute to the world, and the world was created for me to be able to express, to give myself to my friends, my family, my community, and the world in general. I have so much to give because God endowed me with amazing talents and with amazing powers, and there's always more to learn. That, my friends, in a nutshell, is good self-esteem. Ego is all about me. And ego, as we're going to see, does not let us open up to new learning experiences. Because why would I learn from you? I know everything. I'm sure each and every one of you knows people like this. People who just don't have an open part of themselves that allows them, that gives them the capacity to be able to grow as people. They know it all, they've heard it all, they've seen it all. There's nothing you can teach them. And any success that they have is always from their own powers and abilities, and any failures are always somebody else's fault. Those, my friends, are the key traits of anger and ego. And the 2, say the rabbis, are connected. Because when you get angry, it's your ego that's leading you there. You talk to me that way? How dare you talk? Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? When people have a big ego, anger is very, very quick to follow. So today, my friends, in the spirit of about to reach Shavuot in a couple of weeks, we're about to celebrate Lag BaOmer, Thursday night, Friday day, a time we work on ourselves, we're going to try to follow the words of the Rambam that when it comes to ego, just kind of following a middle path is not good enough. You're going to have to bend yourself, as the famous analogy is a young sapling. If you want to straighten it up, you can't just put it here because it'll just bend back. You got to bend it the other way in the hope that it'll end up straight in your life. So ego is something we're going to have to really try to break. And then we're going to look at the opposite of ego, the fine trait of humility. Okay, let's begin. So we're to look at 7 signs that you possibly have a big ego. Now, once again, all of us experience these 7 signs at some point in our lives. We all have room for improvement. We're talking about people who habitually always commit the following 7 offenses, which are key signs to a big ego. Number 1, kind of touched upon it, and that is, you know you got a big ego if you always have to be right. There is no mistake that I am able to have made because I'm just too good, I'm just too smart, I'm too brilliant, I'm the best doctor, the best lawyer, the best mother, the father. There is no room for being wrong. I always have to be right. And if I am wrong, I guarantee to you, it's nothing to do to me. It's only because of the foolish people who are constantly surrounding themselves around me that make me make stupid mistakes. Nothing to do with me, because I'm always right. And if you've ever been in an argument with someone with a big ego, it's just unbearable. They can never admit to the truth. They always have to be in the right. You're never going to see a person, and this is so not conducive to self-growth. You'll never see a person with a big ego in a fight saying, yeah, I made a mistake. I mean, it does border, of course, on narcissism. And generally speaking, narcissists have extremely very large egos, which, as we said, is not really conducive to spiritual growth and to connection to each other in healthy relationships, and of course, to Hashem as well. So that's number 1. Always have to be right. I can never be wrong. Number 2, that you may have the disease of a very large ego. And I've actually witnessed this in my counseling sessions, whether I'm doing private counseling or therapy, or whether I'm working together with a couple. And this is something I look out for, and even people who are aware of this, it's hard for them to overcome this particular trait. And the trait that I'm talking about over here is the habit of interrupting other people. People who are humble, which of course is the great quality that we'll talk about more about in a moment, have the ability to sit, listen, and learn from every person. Everyone has something we can learn from. There's always sometimes good things we can learn from them and sometimes bad things that we shouldn't do. But every single person has something about themselves that we can lower ourselves to learn from those individuals. People, however, with big egos, I've found, don't open themselves up to learn from other people. And therefore, if someone else is talking and I don't like what they're saying, or even if I do like it, but it's not important to me, I'll interrupt them. So I have found, again, this is my own anecdotal evidence, and that is I found that people who are not willing to listen to other people, always speak over them, and always interrupt them, are suffering from a big ego. And again, that's not conducive to the fine trait of humility. That's not conducive to a person who's into self-growth, because I have what I have to say, and you know what? Now it's your turn. And I find sometimes when I'm counseling couples, I'll be like, okay, let's wait a second. Let her or let him talk. Let them get it out of their system. Because people have big egos, by definition, are rarely good communicators. Because in order to communicate, in order to build a relationship, let's be honest, there needs to be two-way communication. If there's no two-way communication, it's not a relationship, it's a dictatorship. A dictatorship is the information's coming from one source, and that's just the way it is. I don't have to listen to you. What I have to say is the most important thing. And your thoughts, feelings, ideas, comments are irrelevant and have no application in my life whatsoever. So if you see yourself constantly interrupting other people, or you may not even see it or hear it yourself, if a third party says, you do interrupt a lot, don't you? You never let me get my words out. That's a sign of a big ego. And that, of course, is not conducive to helping us grow as people and learn how to communicate well. And this idea of bad communication, I have found, is 90% of bad relationships, I believe, come from not giving other people the ability to share their ideas, their thoughts, their frustrations, even their joy. I mean, you may have been in a conversation with someone and they start telling you about a wonderful evening they had, but you don't even let them express that. Oh, that reminds me of an amazing evening that I had, which is going to eclipse the amazing evening that you had. I mean, give the person a chance to talk. Let them tell you about what a wonderful day that they had. Let alone a bad day. Fine, no one wants to hear about someone else's bad day. We have to do it in order to be successful in relationships. But at least if a person is sharing a good event that happened to them, I call this the hijacking theory. That people with big egos want to hijack the entire conversation, not allow you to voice your opinions or even something nice that happened to you during the day, and just want to hijack it and be like, well, you thought you had a good day. I'll tell you, 5 years ago, this happened to me and this is the result of it. There's no communication. It's just a dictatorship, okay? That's number 2. Number 3, I have found, again, this is my own working with people over 20 years of counseling and being a rabbi. I find that people of big egos can build a lot of resentment. They just can't let it go. One of a sign of humility is, you know what? People make stupid decisions. Some people are destined from God, for whatever reason, to have success in this area. Things have happened to me, but I understand that those things happened maybe not from my fault, or maybe there is some my fault, but I'm willing to move on and let my life progress to the next stage. People with big egos, I've found, hold a lot of resentment. And this can last for a long time. I mean, these are people who live in the past, and they will constantly bring up things that you may have done or someone else did to them a year ago, 5 years ago, 50 years ago. I've had people tell me of things that your grandfather did to my grandfather, and therefore I can have no relationship with you. I mean, this resentment thing can last decades or even generations. That's a sign of a big ego. A person who is humble, realizes people make mistakes, realizes that not all those mistakes are their fault or anyone else's fault. Things just happen. We can learn from those experiences, and then we have to move on. But holding resentment is an egoistic way of looking at the world. We could be frustrated, we could be upset. At times we can even be angry with individuals. But holding on to resentment and using passive-aggressive means or non-communication or anger to change those people in order to exact some form of revenge or hold on to a grudge rarely brings any benefit. If you're holding on to resentment against the person from your past, that's your ego speaking. It's a big pill to swallow. You're going to need a big glass of water to let that one go. But as the famous expression goes, sometimes you have to let go and let God. And resentment can hold us back. And really, people with big egos don't want to move forward. They want to live in the past. They want to bring up these past injustices that have happened to them. And when it comes to dealing with a person with a big ego, they're not willing to listen to any rationale because they're in the right. That was rule number 1, or sign number 1. Number 4, which is pretty much the obvious one, people with big egos need constant recognition. And I know I experience this a lot when I will introduce people, and I may miss out one little kernel of information about this person that they feel, prideful about, which could be understandable, and they get very, very upset. Very upset. They constantly need validation, constant affirmation, and constant recognition. Now, all of us want to feel validated and affirmed, and we want to be recognized for our achievements. But that's sporadic, right? You can't live a life like that. You can't have people walking around to these sycophants constantly telling you, you're the best, you're amazing. People with big egos actually feed off that, and they constantly need recognition for every single thing they've ever achieved. And if you are willing to give it to them, they will be, I shouldn't laugh, they'll be very quick to remind you about their amazing achievements, and you better recognize that right now. It's constant, and it's always there. Constant recognition. Really, big ego is also connected, almost ironically, to low self-esteem. The character, again, I may be dating myself a little bit, but if you remember in the Peanuts, the Charlie Brown cartoons that I was a big fan of, that Rabbi Abraham Tversky actually used a lot in his practice and wrote some books using the characters, there was a character called Lucy. I hope those people who can appreciate this metaphor. Lucy was someone who has a really big ego. She's constantly shouting at Charlie Brown, constantly berating other people, constantly asking for great recognition for all of her work. There was no room for self-improvement whatsoever. Ironically, her big ego was actually there to cover over chronic and debilitating low self-esteem. Because when you have no self-esteem, you're going to have to use a lot of noise and sound in order to, and bluster, to make a smokescreen and blow yourself up. Because it's all artificial. It's not real. And so people are constantly needing to be recognized. I find those people are shouting and demanding of other people. And these people, generally speaking, are unbearable to live with, right? Because, or be around, because how much can you recognize another person's accomplishments? You know, thank you so much for being here. You're a wonderful individual, and you give them the introduction, and they always want more. It's never enough. It's the belly that keeps needing to be fed. All right, you're constantly having to throw coal into it because they're just never happy unless you realize how amazing they are. Okay, that's number 4. Number 5, and it may be connected to this one. And there are some people who just don't like other people's success. And may have had a job where you've worked with an individual or two, that whenever someone else succeeds in something, they never give you recognition for it, right? They always want recognition for their own achievements, but are never willing to give you recognition, are never willing to give you respect and honor for your achievements and your successes. I know people who have suffered greatly from parents who are like this, and parents who never say, you did really well, I am so proud of you. And some people go through their entire lives never having received any recognition for any of their successes, the warranted ones that have left a void inside themselves, that they're going to use other methods. And many times those methods are not so good for them. Actually, they're very detrimental to their physical and emotional health in order to fill that void that was left. They just don't like to see other people being successful. Why? I'm not really sure. Maybe that if you're successful and they recognize that, then maybe their own successes won't seem so great. So they're not willing to give you your 1 minute of light shining on you for the great thing you did. And many people say to me that they work for companies and have an extremely demanding boss, but this boss, whenever they do something good, they'll never pray. When they do something wrong, they'll pick on them. But this boss is never willing to give them any recognition for their success. Look, the boss may say to you, well, this will motivate them to do well in the past, well in the future, right? If I just praise them for everything, then, they're going to slack off. Actually, the opposite is true. What we have found, and psychological studies have found numerous times, that if you compliment people for their successes, they're going to be motivated to be more successful for you in the future. This old school idea of not recognizing people, not recognizing their success, is coming from your ego, which we just pointed out is actually coming from your low self-esteem, because if you did a good job, then how about me? But it's not about me right now, so I'm not going to recognize your success. If you don't give other people their moments of success, whether it's friends, whether it's children. I know people who are not willing to give any form of success to their own kids, which sounds insane. It is detrimental to your children's mental health. Number 6 of 7 that you may be suffering from a very, very big ego is that you are extremely opinionated. I have found people with big egos just have extreme opinions about everything. They seem to be the experts in every field, whether it's medicine, science, aeronautics, spirituality, you name it, mathematics, the market. They're always an expert in the market, right? They know exactly what's going on. The fact that they've not reached the highest levels of financial success is neither here nor there. That's not my fault, of course, because it's never my fault. It's always someone else's fault. So I've found that people with big egos are, now we all have opinions and we all have what to say and we all have ideas we want to share with other people. And that's fine, right? We shouldn't be opinionless. We have opinions on things. We have opinions on the war, right, in the Middle East. We have opinions on global. Everyone's got their opinions on everything. But we're talking about people who are extremely opinionated, seem to know it all, and never give you the chance to maybe counter with an alternative opinion. Right? There's just nothing there. There's no room, as we said, for self-growth. If you just don't allow someone else to voice their opinion and be like, you know, I hear what you're saying, I disagree with you, but I'll give you validity and I understand why you're saying it, but I think you're wrong. That's okay. Extremely opinionated people leave no room for anyone else's success. Number 7 of 7, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the antidote to this that we're going to learn from one very great individual who learned it from his ancestor, by the way. And number 7 of 7 signs that you've got a big ego is these people are very, very defensive when someone criticizes them. If you find yourself extremely defensive when someone criticizes you, you aren't willing to be makabel any form of tochacha, any criticism, your ego is too big. You're letting your ego stand in the way of your own personal, emotional, psychological, spiritual development. Because part of life is realizing you make mistakes. And that's a sign of healthy spiritual growth. We all make mistakes. But most of the time, we don't see them. We think what we did was justified and understandable. And it takes someone else to come in and be like, you know, I think you made a mistake over there. And I think you're doing things the wrong way. Now, a person with big ego is, are you crazy? Do you know who you're talking to? Right? I know the answer to everything. If I say it, it must be true. And they're not willing to accept that maybe they made a mistake. Because we already said, they have to be right. But you just offer a criticism of anything. It could be just the way they drive. And they immediately will open themselves up and attack you. There's no room for growth there whatsoever. So those, I have many, many more signs, but we'll leave it with those 7 and we'll go through them again and then we'll do a little bit of antidote work here that we all have to work on, especially at this time of year. Number 1, people with big egos always have to be right. Number 2, I find that people with big egos interrupt other people and never let them voice their ideas, thoughts, opinions, their problems, or even their successes. Number 3, a lot of resentment is held by people with big egos. Number 4, they need constant recognition for every accomplishment, whether that accomplishment happened a week ago, a year ago, or 30 years ago. And they're constantly going to be reminding you of their past accomplishments. They always live in the past, right? They're never in the present, and they're certainly not in the future, unless they have opinion on what's going to happen in the future, and then you won't stop hearing about it. They don't like other people's success. If someone does well, they never ask, you did a great job. You just made a great sale. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. They're extremely opinionated. Not the occasional opinion that we all have on stuff in life, for these individuals, the big egos, there's always an opinion, it's always there, and it must be right. And finally, I find them getting extremely defensive. When I do couple therapy, I find them becoming extremely defensive when someone's criticized them. They don't own it, they interrupt, and they never accept it. So those are the 7 signs. So what's the opposite of ego? Let's just finish with a few minutes with some positive work that we all have room for improvement in. And that is the one trait that the greatest prophet that ever lived, Moshe Rabbeinu, is described as having. And that is the trait of humility, anivut, and anav. And Moshe Rabbeinu, interestingly, the greatest prophet, the greatest Jew, the one who brought the Torah from Shemayim, right? They got this whole Jew thing going. Interestingly, Moshe Rabbeinu is described as being the humblest person that ever stepped foot on the earth. The commentators tell us that means there was no one as humble up to his point. And since then, there's probably not going to be anybody as humble as Moshe Rabbeinu ever again. And it's not a coincidence that that one trait is what led Moshe Rabbeinu to be the giver of the Torah to the Jewish people. It's that exact trait, my friends, that gave Moshe Rabbeinu the ability to be Mekabel Torah. The analogy that is given in the from the holy books is that each one of us is like a vessel, a pot. And we all have walls, right, that enclose ourselves. And many of us have big egos. And the bigger the ego, if you will, the thicker the walls of the pot. So when the walls of your pot, you're so full of yourself that you're not willing to listen to anyone or learn from anyone, you have to interrupt them, never happy about other people's success. You're so full of yourself that the cavity inside your pot is not so big. There's not so much that can fit inside your personal pot. You haven't left much room for self-improvement, self-growth. Moshe Rabbeinu was human, but just barely human. The walls of his pot were paper thin. He wasn't full of himself. He didn't have any ego. He was mevatel. He nullified his ego totally. It was all about self-improvement and helping other people whenever he could. So the walls of his pot were paper thin. What does that do? That leaves a lot more room inside your pot. You can fit a lot more information. Therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was the perfect candidate, Hashem decided, to be the receiver of the Torah. Right? Because Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. In the first Mishnah of Perek Avot, Moshe Rabbeinu was able to receive it because he wasn't full of himself that didn't allow him to receive it. Since he was such a low ego and such a good self-esteem and so much great humility, he was able to fill himself up with everything he needed in order to share it with the rest of us. And there's some amazing stories in the Torah itself that illustrate this exact point. We know there were rebellions against Moshe Rabbeinu. One of the most famous ones was from a cousin of his called Korach and his Edah and his followers. And Korach turned around to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, "You're so power hungry. All you want is power, and all you want is success for yourself, for you and your older brother Aaron," which was the furthest thing from the truth. And as soon as Korach came with that attack on Moshe Rabbeinu didn't get angry, which would have been justified. He didn't start screaming or interrupting Korach. He just fell on his face. What does that mean, fell on his face? That means he says, this is not about me. This is not about my face. This is not about who I am. I'm just doing the job I was given. Which, by the way, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even want. God had to argue with Moshe Rabbeinu at the burning bush for 7 days in order to persuade him to become a leader and the redeemer of the Jewish people. And Moshe Rabbeinu was like, no, it can't be me. I got an older brother, Aaron. He's been living with the Jews all these years. I've been out of town in Midian. The job isn't for me. Absolute humility. But in the end, it was his job and he had to do it. There's another story which shows the great humility and the anti-ego-ness of Moshe Rabbeinu. There were daughters, sisters, children of a man called Slavchad, who died in the desert before they were able to enter into the land of Israel. And these daughters had no brothers, and they're very upset because they really, really wanted a portion in the land of Israel. And the law seemed to be that they were not going to be given a portion of this land because they had no brothers. And they went to Moshe Rabbeinu and they said, Moshe, we're moving into Israel. We love the land. We so want to be there. But unfortunately, our father's dead and we have no one to inherit land from. And Moshe Rabbeinu could have turned around and be like, hey, that's just the way it is. You don't like it, go find someone else to complain to, because that's... And Moshe Rabbeinu said, that doesn't sound right to me. Let me go and talk to God. And Moshe Rabbeinu went to God and said, well, what's the story over here? Because as far as I know, they shouldn't be given a land. And Hashem says, well, actually, there's some laws that you are not aware of that these young women are aware of. And they're right and you're wrong. And a different halakha, a different law from the Torah which Moshe Rabbeinu himself brought down from Mount Sinai, you obviously were not aware of, Moshe Rabbeinu. And these young Jewish women, they're right. They get to inherit the land from their deceased father. Usually we inherit from the living, from what they own. Here, these girls are going to inherit something which their father never even had, because he never got to enter into the land of Israel. And Moshe Rabbeinu was like, great! Thank you so much for telling me. I had no idea. That law, for some reason, I'd missed it. I didn't understand it. And he turned around to these daughters of Saul and said, it's yours. You get to inherit the land. You were right, and I was wrong, because as far as I knew, why would you get a piece of land if your father's not here to give it to you? We see that. Where did Moshe Rabbeinu learn this from? Where do we see this trait of humility come from? And we see it among so many of the greatest Jewish heroes and heroines. I just want to go back for just a couple of moments. I've overrun my time, but I must tell you the story of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu, we know, was told to bring Yitzchak, his one and only son, through his wife Sarah, to the Akedah, to the mountain on Mount Moriah, as a sacrifice. This was the 10th, final, and most difficult test of Avraham Avinu. And what makes it so difficult, in addition to the fact that he was killing his only son, was that he'd spent his entire life telling people not to kill their children for God. He was preaching against idol worship, and a lot of idol worship for centuries, if not millennia, was all about killing your children or people in your community to appease God. And Avram Avinu had told everyone, don't do it. Don't kill God. Don't kill your children for God. And now he's being told to do exactly that. So imagine the scene. Avram Avinu wakes up, Avram Baboki wakes up early in the morning. He doesn't do it at night, stealthily. He doesn't take Yitzchak to his basement and shoot him in the head down there. He walks out in broad daylight with Yitzchak, walking up to Mount Moriah, to the future site of the Beit HaMikdash. And I'm sure people said, Avraham, where are you going? It's like, me, or just going for a walk? With Yitzchak? Yup, with Yitzchak. And where to? Up to that mountain. And what are you going to do up there? I'm going to kill my son Yitzchak. I'm sorry? Didn't you spend the past 100 years plus telling everyone not to kill their children for God? What is Avram Avinu going to have to say? Whether he likes it or not, he's going to have to admit this. If he has no ego and good self-esteem, and he has the trait of humility, he's going to have to say, I was wrong. And that's what he said. Actually, he wasn't wrong. You shouldn't kill your kids. But at that moment, the truth was that I have to bring my son as a sacrifice. What incredible humility. He could have tried to be like, it is what it is. This is the exception. I'm right. I know what I'm talking about. Don't you be asking me stupid questions. We all dealt with such people. That's not the trait that Avram Avinu had. Avram Avinu had the trait of, I made a mistake. And Avram's descendant Moshe Rabbeinu was like that. And David HaMelech made mistakes and was the first one to admit the mistakes that he had made. And King David, and eventually Mashiach as well, but ancestor, Ruth, extreme humility. It's not about me. God gave me a gift. I have something to achieve. I'm amazing. I'm the best doctor, lawyer, father, mother, friend. I'm good. I feel good about myself. But there's always room for improvement. And the reason I'm this great is because God gave me this talent and I have to use it to further my personal mission in this world. That is the difference between ego, which is destructive, good self-esteem and humility, which is the greatest form of growth a person can have. Okay, thank you all very, very much. God willing, we'll pick this up next week. Have an amazing evening. Please do join us Thursday night. We'll be having an amazing Lag BaOmer musical event at Safra Synagogue. I hope you can join us for that beautiful evening, whether live or online. I'll be speaking, Rabbi Fine, my name is Rabbi Abragamov. Do join us, my friends. Have a wonderful day. Kol Tov.